Support WrestleTalk!
Order the magazine using the link below.
Wrestling video games are great, aren't they? Being able to take the action of your favorite wrestling promotion into the comfort of your own home. You control the action. You make the booking decisions you feel are right. You can even make dream matches come to life. But not all games are worth your time, and buggy controls and awful ideas mean you may have wasted your hard-earned money. Some people will tell you that WrestleMania the arcade game is awful, but they're wrong. I am Luke Owen, and these are 5 actual video game disasters. Sometimes a wrestling game just being about wrestling matches isn't enough, and in 2001 THQ, on top of the world with their SmackDown series of games, released WWF Betrayal for Game Boy Color, a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you control a WWF superstar trying to save a kidnapped Stephanie McMahon at the request of Vince McMahon. You can select one of 4 characters: The Rock, Steve Austin, Triple H, and The Undertaker, and the final boss will be different depending on who you choose. The game sees you go through various stages, beating up various people with various weapons, before finally discovering that it was Vince who kidnapped Stephanie all along. What a swerve! You then fight your chosen end boss before capturing the WWF Championship. At 6 levels, only the most die-hard of WWF fanatics is going to be able to tolerate the game's idiotic AI and limited control. When you think of wrestling games, what's the first thing you think of? A Twisted Metal ripoff where WWE superstars drive cars and shoot giant weapons at each other. Yeah, me too. WWE Crush Hour was released for the PlayStation 2 and GameCube in 2003, and takes place in a world where, get this, Vince McMahon realizes his dream of owning all of the television networks and can now put all of his superstars on every TV show and commercial. This is clearly an idea suggested by Vince, as the WWF movie No Holds Barred is about television networks fighting over wrestlers so they can get the best ratings. But it did mean we got to see barbecue things. The game sees you choose from your favorite superstars, from The Rock, Rob Van Dam, The Undertaker, Brock Lesnar, and more, and then drive their vehicle into the Demolition Derby battlefield. There's various modes to play, like Iron Man, Hell in a Cell, and Royal Rumble, but they all pretty much play the same. Jim Ross provides commentary, which is worth it just to hear him say, "The Undertaker has just got twisted rockets." You can then unlock bigger weapons to unleash on your opponent, and even perform special moves like firing super rockets. Although WWE Crush Hour was released as a budget title, it received very mixed reviews, and a proposed Xbox release of the game was cancelled. If you happen to end up with this thanks to a clueless relative or for some other reason we won't embarrass you by going into, you could feasibly enjoy it for a few minutes, perhaps even an hour. But by the time you finish your 7th or 8th encounter, you'll be wishing you just whipped out Carmageddon again instead of plodding on with this gaudy nonsense. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a real emphasis on wrestlers brawling backstage. The introduction of the Hardcore Championship in WWF meant that wrestling could take place in the streets, in bars, and even the Mississippi River. WCW tried to capitalize on this craze, made popular by the wild brawls in ECW, with their own hardcore division and a 2000 game which took place specifically backstage. WCW Backstage Assault was released on PlayStation and Nintendo 64 to a critical panic for its awful controls, bland visuals, and the fact there isn't a bloody wrestling ring in the bloody wrestling game. Instead, players got to choose characters from WCW's roster and compete in Hardcore Challenge, where you fight to win the championship, which you then can't defend. The biggest issue with WCW Backstage is that really it's just a stripped-down version of WCW Mayhem, but with somehow worse graphics. And its backstage gimmick, though brave, becomes very repetitive. It's hard to recommend a wrestling game that doesn't contain any actual in-the-ring wrestling. EA's Backstage Assault is a novel idea, but in the end it doesn't have enough variation to make it worthwhile. Speaking of popular fads in the late 90s and early 2000s, backyard wrestling became a popular VHS and DVD brand in the days before this sort of thing was readily available on YouTube with the Best of Backyard Wrestling series, which gave us names like future WWE Tough Enough contestant M-Dog20. 2003's Backyard Wrestling Don't Try This at Home was a fairly decent game, but Backyard Wrestling 2 There Goes the Neighborhood is a rushed sequel with zero improvements on the gameplay despite Paradox Development's big promises. It does, however, feature a more varied roster than its predecessor, including former ECW wrestlers New Jack, Sabu, and The Sandman, as well as TNA star Sonjay Dutt and rock musician Andrew WK. And yes, just like the DVDs, the game features scantily clad ladies, in the form of adult film stars Tara Patrick and Sunrise Adams. Still, it's classier than BMX XXX, isn't it? The game does boast a fairly decent soundtrack, but it was reviewed very poorly by critics when it hit PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2004. 2 or 3 years ago, Paradox Development's Backyard Wrestling 2 There Goes the Neighborhood might have been a pretty decent entry-level wrestling game, but the reality in the here and now is that it's a pretty lackluster realization of our favorite pseudo sport. Since their debut in the late 80s, The Simpsons have had many video game adventures. Bart Simpson has fought off space mutants, saved the world, and even survived nightmares. Although they had the fantastic arcade game, The Simpsons wouldn't have a decent outing on the home consoles until their GTA clone Simpsons Hit and Run in 2003. And never is that more true than the 2001 disaster The Simpsons Wrestling. How did this go so wrong? There's a great variety of characters, brilliant locations, and a simple gimmick, but Simpsons Wrestling remains a wretched game, bugged by horrible controls, ugly graphics, and a repetitive grappling system. The game does have the lore of unlocking classic characters like Bumblebee Man and Professor Frink, but it's hard to stay invested and continue playing. Game Informer's Andrew Reiner called it one of the worst games on the PlayStation. As Botchamania's Matthew put it, wrestling is great, The Simpsons are great, video games are great, and yet... Blimey, those were bad, but what about 5 spooky WWE characters that failed? And what is The Undertaker's missing WrestleMania 21 match? Click the video to the left to find out more. Press subscribe and support WrestleTalk on Patreon. I have been Luke Owen, and that was wrestling.